Good morning, good morning. This is Jamaica Live. We're on Bridge 99, broadcast here every Monday. New starting time, we start at midday and we go on until 2 o'clock. Thank you so much for joining us. We look forward to a very interesting discussion. Today, we have some very, very interesting guests. And we're going to be bringing them on in a little while. Something we discussed earlier this year is the issue of governance, the state of governance in Jamaica. We're going to return to it today. Why? Because it is such an important issue. As we go about our lives, as we try to cope, as we try to find some measure of comfort and satisfaction for ourselves and our families. We live in a country. That country has to be managed. It has to be governed. Otherwise, it would be like a jungle where it's every man for himself, where it would be a land of predators and preys, where it would be the struggle for the fittest to survive. Only animals in a jungle live like that. And that's why we elect a government. We do that through a democratic process. One man, one vote. Every vote must count, so that the government that is elected is the government that the people decided they wanted to entrust the powers of government to, in order for them to carry out the functions of government, governing. We pay taxes, every one of us. Individuals who are employed pay income tax, or they are supposed to pay income tax. Companies that make profits pay company tax. Or I must say again, they're supposed to. If you own a piece of land, you pay property tax, or you're supposed to. And if you don't fall into any of these categories, you still pay taxes. When you go buy something at the store or supermarket, you pay GCT. That is one tax that it's almost impossible to avoid. Those taxes are paid to enable the government to govern, to run the country. How they run the country, how they use those taxes, that is what governance is all about. And that's what we're going to be discussing today. Governance is different from government. Government is the doer, the actor. Governance is the way the doers, the actors operate. And the way that they operate determines the quality of their governance. Whether we who elect them and put them there are being served, or whether they're acting in our interest, or whether we would be better off without them, better off living in the jungle. So governance is important in our lives, has a profound impact on the way we live and the extent to which we can achieve the happiness that we seek in life. Let me just pause here and hail up Beauregard. Bo, how things?
And on the app at JAMP 360. Good afternoon and welcome. Thank you all for tuning in. Thank you all for joining me. It is now time for us to cross over the Bridge 99 FM, where we connect with the former Prime Minister of Jamaica, the Honorable Bruce Golding, for what we call Jamaica Live. And today's topic is the state of governance in Jamaica. Let's join this conversation right now.
Hey, Bo, how you doing?
Good afternoon, sir. How is everything?
Not bad. How is New York?
New York is all right. We're expecting a lot of traffic today because there's the General Assembly happening at the UN
yes.
today.
When does that start? Today?
Yes, that is today, sir. So already there should be some traffic in Midtown area and certain parts of Manhattan. We expect that the Prime Minister of Jamaica is going to be here.
Yes, I'm sure he will be.
Yes.
What's the weather like up there?
The weather is wonderful. It's beautiful.
Yes.
Yes, sir.
I think Puerto Rico got a battering though.
Yes, I heard about that.
Lord
I saw
of
it
mercy,
also.
and I don't think they fully recovered from, what was the one that they hit them, Maria?
Yes, sir.
Yeah.
A couple of years back.
But the weather up there is good though.
The weather here is good, sir. How's everything in Jamaica?
Yeah, well, our weather is alright too. I mean, we've been getting some rains.
Okay.
But you know the problem that we live with down here. We had a terrible situation yesterday at a football match in Spring Village, where them shut up.
Oh, that situation.
Yeah,
yes,
man, they shut up 9 people and 3 of them dead.
Yes, I heard about that situation.
And I know the place very well. It's near my hometown, Old Harbour.
Yes, I saw videos from that situation also. 9 people, 3 dead. Very crazy. Gunmen draw down on the people on the football field.
And for the day when we can wake up one morning and don't hear no bad news like that.
Yes, true indeed. I really apologize when I laughed at first because I thought you were talking about the Roper Cup action.
Oh, no. That is part of what we're talking about today, governance. Because governance also impacts that. So, thank you, Bo.
Yes,
Hail up everybody for me up there.
No problem.
We're talking about governance. Now, there are 2 important elements to governance, and I want to explain. One element has to do with the systems that are in place to ensure that the government operates within a framework that ensures integrity. In other words, you want your government to be honest, to be trustworthy. They mustn't use the power that you have given them to look out for themselves or their friends. So you want integrity and you want honesty. But you also want them to act transparently. They must be open. In other words, you must know what is going on. You don't want anything to be hidden from you. Because if you don't know what's going on, you won't know whether they are looking after us, the people, or whether they're looking after themselves and their friends. So they must be open, what we call transparency, because it's not their private business they're running the people's business, and therefore the people must know how their business is being run. And then thirdly, they must be accountable. They must accept, and if they're not willing to accept, they must be forced to bear responsibility for their actions. And if they do anything that is improper, they must face the consequences and receive the punishment. The other element, remember I said that there were 2 elements of governance, and that is one. That's the first one. The other element of governance has to do with whether or not they are carrying out their duties efficiently and effectively. So, your government may be honest. They're not thieving the money. They're not looking out for no friends. They're being very transparent. And they're being accountable. But it is also important that they be efficient and effective in carrying out the functions of government. It's not just a matter of them doing their best, because their best may not be good enough. It is the quality of their performance, what we call the deliverables, and whether they are delivering on those deliverables. And what are the deliverables that I'm talking about? Protecting your rights, because You have rights that are spelled out in the Constitution. And government is there to make sure that your rights are not violated, not ignored, not disregarded, not trampled on. And if somebody messes with your right, your government is there to ensure that you can get redress, you can get satisfaction, and where appropriate, you can get compensation. So protecting your rights, that's one deliverable. Security, and all of us understand this now because we talk about crime and violence, and that is a big, big problem in Jamaica. Look at what happened yesterday evening in Spring Village. Football match going on. Football match is supposed to be something where everybody enjoying themselves, apart from the team that going to lose. But they enjoy themselves up to the point where they lose. And gunmen them just open up, shot, kill 3. And apparently the 3 include the one that they were looking for. But they killed 2 more in the process. And 6 other people are injured. I don't know if that death toll don't gone up since I heard the news. So the second deliverable, security. Making sure that the people are secure. Secure, protected from gunmen, from thief and murder. The third deliverable, and I'm not going to name out all of them, but I'm going to name out some of the more important ones. Education. Because if your children are not properly educated, they're going to face a dark and dismal, bleaky future. Your public health, ensuring that you are protected from diseases, ensuring that if you get sick, if you contract a disease or you contract some, or you develop some illness, non-communicable diseases they call them, that you can get proper medical attention. And of course the public amenities, like the roads, the water, the public transportation, the garbage collection, the state of our markets. You go to market to buy food and buy meat. And if you're buying food and meat somewhere, then the place where you're buying that food and meat must be clean, must be kept clean, and must be well managed. Now, when you get to the second element of governance, this is where now you get into a thing called a judgment call. And there will be different judgments that are called. For example, you want the government to fix your road, you pay taxes, you elect an MP, you elect a councillor, and you expect your road to be fixed. But it costs money to fix the roads. And therefore a judgment has to be made. And that judgment has to take into account the amount of money that is available to the government to fix the road. If they don't have enough money, they're not going to be able to fix all the roads. So that has to be taken into account when we're making the judgment call as to how efficient the government is in delivering the services and the amenities and the facilities that you expect of them. I'll give you another example. You have some people who live in a remote rural community that has no electricity. And they expect the government to see to it that electricity is provided. But suppose it's only 15 or 16 houses in that community. And in order to get the electricity to them, you're going to have to run 2 or 3 miles of light pole and wire. Then you're going to face a problem because the light bill that they're going to pay, the 12 or 15 of them, is not going to be able to cover the cost of buying the poles and the wires and running it that distance. It may just not be feasible to provide them with the electricity, but they want electricity. So they say, well, the government not performing because I don't get no light. You have to make a judgment call, and in that judgment call, you have to factor in how reasonable it is to run 2-3 miles of electricity wires in order to serve 12 or 15 houses. Now, that's where you get into a thing, you're making judgment call on a judgment call. I'll give you an example of what I'm talking about. Let us say the government get up one day and you hear over the news that the government has provided $50 million to help the Jamaica Football Federation qualify for the World Cup. Now, a whole heap of football fans going applaud that. That's a good thing, good government. Because we want the reggae boys to get to World Cup. But you may have a woman somewhere who need to remove a gallbladder and she can't get an appointment for the operation to be done because one out of the 2 operating theaters at the hospital is out of service. And she is going to argue, what kind of governance is that? Because I need the surgery. I can't get the surgery. The $50 million that the government spends to help the reggae boys qualify for World Cup. That $50 million could have fixed up the operating theater so that me and others could have get the surgery we need. So, she's making a judgment call on the judgment call that the government made because the government decided that helping the reggae boys was right now more important than fixing that operating theater. You get the point I'm trying to make. So, that affects people's perception. That affects people's assessment of the quality of the governance that they are getting, whether the government is operating efficiently and effectively. So remember the two facets that I'm trying to focus the discussion on. One is on the systems that are in place to ensure honesty and integrity and transparency and accountability. That's one phase of it. And the other aspect of it is, all right, if you suppose you check off all of those, yes, you're doing well on those, but you still want your road to be fixed. You still want your taxes to be properly spent. Because government can waste your money without teeth in it, They simply don't spend it properly. They don't plan properly. They don't engage the competent people to carry out the work that government has to have done. And you are the person at the receiving end who gets shafted because you are the person who have to travel on the bad road every day. You are the person who can't get the treatment that you need to get at the hospital. You are the person whose daughter is not going to make it in life because they can't get no proper schooling at the school they go to because they're not spending the money in education the way that it should be spent to give your daughter the best possible chance of making it through life. Many of the issues that we complain about every day have to do with governance. How the people who govern us govern us. Let's delve into that again today. As I said, we did it earlier in the year, but it's so important a discussion that we want to get back into it again today when we come back. Welcome back to Jamaica Live. We're on Bridge 99, and as you just heard from Beauregard, we're also on Irish JAMP in New York. Today we're talking about governance, an important issue. And one organization that has made it perhaps the most central point of its focus and has spent a considerable amount of time discussing, pointing out, making objective assessment of it is the National Integrity Action. And I'm very pleased to be joined by the Executive Director, Professor Trevor Munroe. Trevor, are you there?
I'm here with you, Bruce. So how are you? Can I correct you quickly? Reorganization a couple of years ago, I'm Principal Director, no longer Executive Director.
I see. Okay. All right. That's
fine. No problem. How is my former student doing?
Struggling. I'm still learning. Tell me. Let me tell you how I want to frame the discussion. I'm looking at the glass and the glass has some water. And I'm not going to detain myself or you as to whether the glass is half empty or it's half full. Why do I say that, Trevor? I've looked at a number of other countries that are comparable to us. I'm not comparing Jamaica to some of the Scandinavian countries and so on. I'm looking at countries that have been through similar experiences or are still trying to fight their way into development. And tell me if I'm wrong. I get a sense that Jamaica is far ahead of most of them in terms of the institutional arrangements we have in place. And I mean, we can name them, from public accounts to National Contract Commission to, Indicom to the various mechanisms that are in place that are supposed to ensure accountability. Integrity Commission, fairly robust integrity laws. But we end up very often with less than satisfactory rating internationally. And if the recent nationwide Blue Dot poll is anything to go by, people's perception is that, we're not cutting it. The government is corrupt. Is it that we have the systems in place, but the systems are not working? Is it that we're not allowing them to work? Where are we messing up?
I think you put your finger on an important observation, Bruce. In terms of our institutional arrangements, we are way ahead of so many other countries that got independence around the same time. And in fact, in terms of our historical evolution, equally so. I mean, Ghana, Nigeria, you name it, Pakistan, all of them have had in the recent history, since independence, military rule. We have never had that. Even mature democracies, the United States being the first example, have had assassinations of chief executives, of heads of civil society organizations like Martin Luther King. Jamaica has never had that. And therefore, we have to acknowledge that the way in which we have managed to preserve the institutional framework and actually develop it is really the way to get it to work better, so that we don't have the extraordinary drop in confidence where Blue Dot tells us that in 2021, 71% of the folks had confidence in the government. That's now down to 36%. And in the opposition, 45% is now down to 15%. The people are obviously feeling and seeing things that you and I need to talk about. And basically, it is that the promises made in terms of institutional functioning are not delivering as was anticipated and indeed as was promoted by the leadership of the country at different levels. And that's a really serious issue that has to be confronted.
Whose fault is that, Trevor?
I think all of us have to share the blame. Leadership, most of all, because that's why you're a leader. The buck stops with you, whichever the institution is. But let us be clear that the reason why we have one of the most advanced electoral administration systems in the world, way ahead of the United States, which is now regressing to where we were in the 1960s and 70s, is because leadership woke up at the last minute. The churches, the civil society organizations, like, CAFE.
Can I interrupt you there? Because this is what I want you to help me to address. It's not the government. I mean, Edward Seaga and Michael Manley played their critical role in the beginning. But it is not Andrew Holness or Mark Golin that makes the Electoral Commission work. The Electoral Commission knows what its job is and it is doing its job. We have an Integrity Commission. They don't need no prime minister. I don't want the prime minister telling them, well, listen, you better go look at some people over there to see if anything corrupt going on. They must do their job. What's the problem?
Exactly. The problem there.
And if they're not being allowed to do their job, then that is when somebody must pick up the phone and call you.
Well, there are two issues here. One is that in a large number of these institutional arrangements. Professionals are doing their job. We heard Indicom a couple of days, in fact, this morning as well, speaking about their concerns regarding Horace Chang's remarks. Indicom professionals doing their job. We're in the top 10% in the world, ahead of all of the mature democracies when it comes to freedom of the press. We read the Gleaner editorials. They're saying, look, we need to plug the loopholes in our electoral, financial, political finance arrangements. They're doing their job. But the truth is that in too many institutions, the job is not being done. And those who are to haul them up, and I refer to the public bodies, where literally we have about 140, only about 30 or so the last time I checked are in compliance with the law, which says they need to tell the people through the parliament and through the cabinet how much money you spent last year in audited accounts, what are your plans, how did they go? And I think that in that case, the ministerial directorate needs to make sure it is informed, and there's no problem in that case. You and I can go on the Cabinet Secretary's website right now and see which are in compliance with the law, which are not. And it's not only the financial secretary, as she did last year, who writes to all of them and say, look, pull up your socks. If they don't pull up their socks, they need to be brought before the entities concerned, in the same way that the acting permanent secretary and the Minister of Education was brought before the Auditor General, and she recommended surcharge. And by the way, we don't know what's happening there. So professionals there are who are doing their job. When they don't do their job, it's the job of the minister and the public to bawl out. And when the public bawl out, Bruce, there are so many instances now, and the public needs to understand this, that when you speak, things do happen. Look at in the case of Rocky Mead.
Luckily, Rocky Mead said I declined. Can I ask you to just pause there 1 minute? New York has to take a break. We're probably going to take 1 year too.
Sure, no problem.
Welcome back. It's Jamaica Live. We're on Bridge 99. We're talking with Professor Trevor Munroe of National Integrity Action. Yes, Trevor, you were going on to make an important point.
Yeah, I was saying that the large numbers of professionals are doing their jobs in these very important institutions, which are setting examples for countries around the world. But when the professionals don't do their job, two things need to happen. Our people need to get involved, not just to withdraw confidence, but to get involved, because getting involved produces results. As we can see in the instances in the last few days, the suspect appointment of Rocky Mead as head of the Cabinet Secretariat, people spoke out, and Rocky withdrew correctly so and commendably so. The issue of the funding of Camina's campaign, again, people spoke out. Nestor Morgan replied partially. He needs to reply fully. And the only way they're going to get that, Bruce, is by people experiencing, learning, and every day seeing that when you participate, when you get involved, not just withdraw confidence, you get results. Because one of the principles of good governance, of course, as you know, is responsiveness. I think that people need to learn that lesson and not just get despondent and hopeless in their feelings. On the other hand, the government, including the Prime Minister, needs to remember that very important statement which he made on his inauguration in 2020, which I commended him for. He said, and here I quote, "We must seek to prevent the occurrence of actions which weaken public trust and damage the integrity of the government." Too many of those actions are occurring, and it's undermining confidence in the government. It's not, the opposition is not gaining any ground because people feel that it's a plague on all their houses. We need to go beyond that. They need to get engaged, get involved. That's how you got a festival song. Remember, there was going to be none. People said, no, sir. 2022, we must have a festival song.
Let's focus on the mechanics for a moment, because not everybody has a microphone, as I do know. Not everybody has a newspaper column that they write. In terms of the robustness of our oversight arrangements, in terms of our free press, in terms of civil society. And I'm referring to civil society now in terms of organized civil society. The various organizations. I'm going to have Jeanette Calder coming on shortly. I'm going to be having Narcisse as well. People who, through their various organizations, are acting on behalf of the people, shining a spotlight, asking questions, demanding answers. How are we robust enough?
No, I think we're robust. Many of the Caribbean territories, whenever we have conversations, envy the extent to which civil society seems to get response in Jamaica. But we're far from robust enough. And part of the reason for that, Bruce, is that the civil society organizations, NIA I can speak for, have uneven resources in which to utilize to speak out. Take one area, the importance of building public awareness. Now, you know in Jamaica, out of sight is out of mind. If you are not on the television screen pointing out what is going to happen to the man or the woman in the street in their daily lives if contracts are not given to persons of experience and competence in the National Works Agency, if you are not there constantly showing that, people get disgusted, block the road, get a result. The same contractor comes around,
well, we're
the wrong materials, and therefore doesn't get the sustained competence and value for money as the public requires.
But where is that funding to come from? Because you certainly don't want it from the oversight.
No, but the funding, speaking again for NIA, the funding comes in some measure from commendably public interest private sector businesses who have really, but they are unfortunately the minority. They give you substantial support, not for anything in return except for you to speak out on behalf of good governance and on behalf of the people, and we thank them for that. But there needs to be broader engagement by private sector in supporting civil society organizations. Thankfully as well, international development partners who want to make sure that when their governments and their countries provide assistance to Jamaica, the taxpayers of their country, the fund reaches the sources, the objects it's supposed to do. It's supposed to repair the roads, it's supposed to fix the bridges, and is not landed in somebody's pocket along the way. So those sources are commendable, but the civil society bodies to do the work that is required and that is necessary and that we're attempting to do obviously need more funding support at the same time as we retain the kind of alertness to speak out in the way that we are now and the way that NIA does and JAMP as well.
Now tell me, in terms of international partners, is there any conflict there?
No, well, let me give you an example, concrete. NIA, we just signed a contract with Transparency International, funded by the European Union, to do an assessment of the extent to which parliamentary oversight of the executive is working in Jamaica, and to make recommendations to Jamaicans, to our authorities, to our people, as to how to strengthen the extent to which Parliament holds the executive to account. So it's up to us to make sure that the contracts that we sign and the proposals to which we respond are in keeping with Jamaica's national interests. And this one certainly is. We're about to do another to support citizen security in communities. We have to be the watchdog over ourselves, and of course we have to obey the laws which require charities to register and also to put their accounts on for public disclosure. Unlike the political parties, by the way, to mention that as a footnote, we have to disclose where we get our money from and where we spend it.
Now, in terms of our oversight bodies, and I'm talking about, Contracts Commission, Integrity Commission, institutions like those, to what extent are you satisfied that they are transparent enough? To what extent are they commanding public trust because they are leveling with the people? I know the problems, of course, with the Integrity Commission and the gag clause, which is something that I really believe ought to be dealt with. But to what extent can they do more to command public trust, to excite public interest, and to make the persons and the organizations and the entities that they are oversighting feel their presence?
I think they can do more. They require budgets that would allow them to do public awareness building. In fact, we are hopefully about to partner with some of them to make the public more aware of what they're doing, to make the public appreciate that Crime Stop, for example, the more the public speaks out, sends in tips, the evidence demonstrates. The more guns are caught, the more ammunition is brought in. MOCA, I don't think they do enough to publicize their successes. That big prosecution, successful jailing of corrupt persons in relation to the Manchester Municipal Corporation took a lot of effort. Public engagement, public involved, witnesses coming forward, prosecutors, investigators doing their job, and ultimately the judge. So I think more can be done to build public awareness by those organizations and by NRA-type bodies, civil society bodies, to make their work known and to utilize the success cases to engender more confidence by the public and more reporting by the public to them. And that's happening, by the way. The reports getting to the Auditor General, to the Integrity Commission, and to others seem to be increasing, and that's a very good sign that the public is not just withdrawing confidence in the system, but also coming forward to try their best to help to bolster the institutional effectiveness beyond where it is now.
How accountable are the civil society watchdogs? I mean, I've heard people say, for example, they would like to see the report of National Integrity Action.
Well, we're registered with the Cooperative Department, and we're required both by TAJ and them to put our audited accounts online. We are a little behind because of the COVID and the whole auditing process. Our last audited financial accounts on our website and with the authorities is 2019. And that sets out where we get money from and what we do with it.
The reason I raise it is that...
With the political... But Bruce, let me make a point. That part of the shortfall in our overall arrangement is that the political parties are not obliged to do that.
Yes.
And therefore people wonder, in fact, the recent 2021 LAPOP report says that a significant percentage of Jamaicans, not as large as other countries in the hemisphere, believe that elections can be bought and sold in Jamaica. We need to get that transparency, not just to the civil society bodies, but to the political parties in strengthening the legislation dealing with registration and campaign finance.
I have no difficulty in agreeing with you on that. I'm just raising the point, though, if we are to be objective and balanced about it, is that the people also ought to know when an organization purporting to champion their cause, that the people have an idea as to who is behind that organization, because very often it's just one name we know and one face
Absolutely.
we see.
And that's one of the challenges. I mean, in NIA's case, we need to see more faces. We need to see more bodies speaking on behalf of the organization. And we're working on that at this point. But I do agree with you that people need to know where we get our money from. I mean, look, we can't be saying to the government, tell the people through the parliament who is giving money to fund a campaign of the kind we just saw. And we stand by that, and we're glad Morgan has begun to reveal, but it needs to come fully clean. And we can't be saying, look, the campaign finance legislation needs to be strengthened so we know who is paying the piper and therefore calling the tune, and not being able to apply that to ourselves as well. So we need to be more up-to-date with our accounts. We need to make sure that they're properly posted. As I said, we're a little behind. The last one we posted was 2019. We need to get the 2020 done as well. So, yes, I agree with that, Bruce, and you know, I'm glad you raised the point.
Good. Thank you very much, Trevor. Dr. Trevor Munroe, Principal Director of National Integrity Action. Let's take a break. Welcome back. It's Jamaica Live. We're on Bridge 99. Today we're talking about governance, the state of governance in Jamaica. And I'm very pleased now to welcome to the program a development policy analyst, Mrs. Carol Narcisse. Carol, welcome to the program.
I thank you so much, Mr. Golding. How are you?
I give thanks every day.
All of us should. Yes, indeed.
You know, I've been to, since Friday, I've been to 3 funerals. No? I go to funerals every week.
Oh,
and it occurred to me that about a half of them are for people who are younger than me.
Oh, boy.
So I give thanks.
Yeah, every day we wake up and are standing is a day to give thanks.
Tell me, today we're talking about governance. In terms of,
yes.
I wanted to kind of press your mind a little bit. In terms of our systems of accountability, in terms of our mechanisms for oversight and for transparency, how far have we come and how much further do we have to go? That's one. Secondly, how is it working? What are the weaknesses? How can we strengthen it?
We have come far. We have put in place a fairly robust set of system, a framework, right? And by robust, I mean in terms of the structures that we have put in place, not necessarily how they have been allowed to function, and not necessarily how they are constrained or not constrained by the laws that govern them, right? But as an entity, as a structure, right? So we have Integrity Commission, we have various institutions that are given to oversight, accountant general, and so on. We have the single anti-corruption institution, et cetera, et cetera. We have committees of parliament that have been long-standing, and so it's not that we have been short of institutions. I think part of the areas are the gaps that we have are, one, I don't think we have a sufficient political commitment to having those institutions be vigorous, be rigorous and thorough, and even be aggressive in the pursuit of their mandate. So you see it in the Single Anti-Corruption Agency, Integrity Commission Law Act, in which how matters being investigated can be brought to public attention, how that is constrained, and so on. You see it as well in how little attention is paid in the Parliament to the reports that are tabled, and how little the Cabinet pays attention to the reports of Parliament having looked at reports. So when the Parliament looks, for example, at the Auditor General's reports, research that Jamaica Accountability Meter Portal did, looking at Auditors General reports from 2016 through 2010 through to 2016, I think was the period we looked. We couldn't find where, after it is tabled in our Parliament and there is some discussion, no further action was taken in that six-year period. No reference to the Parliament, no indication that, no further reference to the Parliament, no indication that the Cabinet took up the recommendations that would have come from anywhere, etc. So there is very limited or very insufficient follow-through on the findings and recommendations of the bodies that we have put in place. And there is a tendency to want to constrain them. There is a tendency to cheat at their doing the jobs that we have set them to do. So doing pretty well on setting up institutions, but each time we set, and mechanisms, but each time we set them up, we seem to want to backpedal. So you're introducing opposition chairs, for example, of parliamentary committees, for the very good reason that you did that, because there would be for the opposition an incentive, well, not an incentive, but less of a likelihood that their approach would be to just rubber stamp what is being brought. Right? That gets turned back. That gets undone. Your support for impeachment legislation, no action taken on the matter. So it comes back, the leader of the opposition, after the nth corruption or alleged corruption scandal comes up, or inappropriate action, as we saw with MP, the MP that is alleged to have public caught on camera hitting a woman. The matter of impeachment comes back up. The leader of the opposition tables it. I don't think it has made it to any order paper for discussion. So the short answer to your question, we've come a good distance with putting in the institutions and the mechanisms. We are not committed to their robust implementation. We look for every opportunity to amend the legislation in ways that constrain them even further. We put clauses in the legislation that are intended to muzzle them as much as possible. And yeah.
How effective, for example, the press? The press has a powerful opportunity to be an effective watchdog. How effective has the press been? In terms of investigating, finding out, publishing?
I think there is a mixed bag there as well. If you take the special reports, for example, that are being done by the young journalists on television Jamaica, they do excellent work. They raise that's the kind of inquiring, thoughtful, putting the different sides on the table so that people can make an informed judgment and informed decisions. The ferreting out of matters that would not have come to public notice had it not been for the media, matters to do with, on the face of it, board members of public institutions that give themselves and their own companies the lion's share of contracts and don't seem to see how that poses a conflict of interest. Had it not been for media reports on these matters, we would not have known. So I think that the media have been trying. I think, though, that we are at risk of everything becoming so politically tribalized that even media is constrained, or how we receive reportage from media is colored by whether it's a report about our party or our government, right? So I think the national space for robust inquiry, questioning, investigation, holding to account, setting high standards for transparency and insisting that those standards be met, that culture is being compromised by how everything is framed in, well, you're only raising the questions because you belong to this party or that, or the whataboutism. What about what so-and-so did 10 years ago, 12 years ago, as if we should not have an expectation that each government that we put in place is going to do better than the one before, is going to take us further, is going to set higher standards. It's almost as if we know the citizenry are comfortable with lower governance standards as long as it's our people practicing it.
Tell me, do the various civil society groups, you're involved in one, I believe you're involved in several.
I'm involved in several.
Do they collaborate? Do they kind of exchange notes? Let me tell you where I'm going.
Yes.
In the same way that we tend, sometimes to react, perhaps not as much as we should, when some international organization, be it Transparency International or be it
Amnesty International,
Freedom Press or whatever, or be it some congressional report.
Yes.
If our local civil society watchdogs, if, for example, they were to pool together, team up together, and once a year address the country in terms of our assessment as to what has happened over the last 12 months, in terms of accountability, in terms of transparency, in terms of the functioning of oversight bodies and so on. I wonder, you see,
I agree with you.
You can turn on any radio, you know, and every time there's a discussion program and national integrity action is mentioned, labor rights, etc., Munroe. Right?
Yeah, no, I agree with you, and I believe that, you know, so recall that there was the Jamaica Civil Society Coalition, right?
Can I ask you to just hold for me, Carl? I just have to sign off New York because they have to go off now. Beauregard.
Okay.
Beauregard.
Yes, Mr. Golden, sir.
Yeah, you're going to leave me now.
All right, sir. Very interesting conversation as usual, and we'll do this again on Monday.
Yeah, man. We'll link up next week, Monday. Say hello to all the Jamaicans up there for me before you sign off.
All right. You do the same in Jamaica.
Yeah, Beauregard, I must hail up all the Jamaicans here. Thank you, Bo. Yeah, Carl.
Yeah, remember that we had a Jamaica Civil Society Coalition, right?
What happened to that?
Which, well, you know, it operated between 2010 and 2015. And so it kind of overlapped on the tail end of your administration and for much of the PNP administration that came in after, right? And you will recall it came into being because of the whole Dudas matter and the fact that several organizations, church groups, private sector, this, that, were issuing statements, calling for action, blah, blah, and much of the statements were saying similar things. And at the time, because I was on radio at the time, seeing all these statements coming past my, eyesight, I made contact with the presidents of the various organizations. I said, listen, I'm seeing your statements. You're all saying about 5 things in common. It really would make sense for you to be working together to try and advance these 5 things. They agreed. That's how that coalition came into being.
What caused this demise?
So it was made up of the presidents and chairs of just about every civil society grouping in the country. So you would understand that they would then be operating double responsibility for leading their respective organizations and responsibility for trying to lead and keep going this grouping. And after a while, that became more and more difficult for the organizations to sustain. And so at a point, we said, you know what? There is no need for an organization to be kept in existence just because. If it's not managing to keep its membership as engaged, if it's not able to keep its work program going as effectively, if it's blah, blah, then perhaps it should disband. And so we agreed that we would stay together as a loose network, but not as, where we share information, etc. Where it's possible to take joint action, we will, but not to try and keep another institution going, trying to find funding, trying to this, trying to that. But to come back to your point, it is that kind of working together across different groupings in the society is absolutely essential. And I totally agree with you that an annual state of governance engagement of the country would be very important.
Can I beg some more of your time? And if you have no objection, I want to bring on Jeanette Calder as well, who I think you know very well.
Oh, no, not at all, of course.
Yes. Can we just take a break and we come back? We'll link up both of them. Today we're talking about governance. Second time that we've taken on the subject, with We dealt with it way back in January, I believe. But I don't think that we were able to treat with it as extensively as I would have wanted at that time. There's just so much you can do in 2 hours, no? So we came back to it today. And we're very pleased to be joined now by Ms. Jeanette Calder, who is the Executive Director of the Jamaica Accountability Meter Portal. Jeanette, are you there?
I certainly am, and so happy to be. Thank you for having me.
And I have Carol Narcisse working.
Fantastic. Hi, Carol. How you do?
I have our working overtime for straight pay.
Well, I'm glad to join.
Tell me something, Jeanette. One of the questions that I had put to Carl before was...
Just before you do, Mr. Golding, just full disclosure, I am on the board of JAMP, yeah?
Oh, I see. Okay. Good to know.
Yes.
A question that I had posed was, in terms of systems of accountability, in terms of oversight, structures, and in terms of their workings, how far have we come? How much further do we have to go? I'm not getting into an argument about whether the glass half full or half empty. So I wanted to put to you, Jeanette, some questions that you can answer, I'm sure.
That's right.
If I wanted to know what contracts were awarded by all the various agencies of government for the month of July or August, can I access that information? If I wanted to know what waivers were granted, tax waivers, incentives were granted to companies and individuals by the Ministry of Finance, by the Minister of Finance, and what were the reasons, what justified them? Can I access that information? I want to start with, you see, if I have the information, then I have a responsibility as to what I'm going to do with it.
Absolutely.
But can we get all of that kind of information?
I would just start off by saying that it's really true to say that there are a number of things, such as the ones you mentioned, that we had and have been able to access in the past, 10 years ago, some 20 years ago, that it is really painful for an advocate like myself who looks at public financial accountability to recognize in the era, in the general governance era, where folks are talking about accessing information proactively, government don't have to give you, it should really just be there for citizens. When you have a prime minister who, it really encouraged me to do what I did when in 2015 promised that that is his platform, it's difficult for me to sit here and say to you, for example, since May of 2006, you would have been able to go to the Contractor General's website and be able to see where is public funds flowing. Any contract over $500,000, who is getting it? Was it tendered? How many people tendered? Amazing best practice that Jamaica should be proud of. And for the last 2 years, Mr. Golding, the public, the media, civil society organizations can no longer access that.
Why?
The Integrity Commission, there's an act, I heard you made reference to it earlier, I think when I caught a piece with Trevor, where you said you have your own concerns, but there's a section of the Act, 56.1, that clearly states that government contracts should be held as secret and confidential. Now, I don't know how we can fight corruption in any way or form when procurement information, you and I know, is at the heart of the concern of how money flow, contracts being padded, are we getting value for money, when we don't know, the media don't know.
Hold on. Let me make sure I understand you. You're saying that the beneficiaries of government contract, that is no longer being published?
That is correct. So for 14 years, we had a practice that Jamaica could boast about. There are not many jurisdictions where that would be just there for your taking. So investigative journalists would be able to go and look at trends, patterns.
Well, you might have followed the legislation when it went through Parliament. What was the argument? What was the justification given?
Well, this is what is interesting. In the legislation that preceded the Integrity Commission, remember we had a Parliamentary Integrity Commission before that focused on the statutory declarations for parliamentarians. That same clause was present in that legislation. The question, Mr. Golding, which civil society and the public hasn't gotten an answer to from government as yet is, why has it been interpreted differently under this administration? That's just the honest question, and we do not yet have an answer. What we can tell you... What was in there?
You're confusing me, you know. And
I would hate to do that.
I don't know that you have somebody who normally do that.
Well, I can understand why this matter
What?
might confuse you.
I mean, the Parliamentary Integrity Act didn't have anything to do about publishing contract, no?
May I read the clause for you, Mr. Golding,
Yeah, sure.
so that it's clear to everyone? So, Section 56.1 of the Integrity Commissions Act, which deals with privilege and confidentiality, says, every person who has an official duty under this Act or being employed or otherwise concerned in any way with the administration of the Integrity Commissions Act shall regard and deal with as secret and confidential all information, and it gives you examples, statutory declarations, government contracts, prescribed licenses, and all other matters relating to any matter before the Commission. That has been interpreted to mean that we can no longer get public procurement information because that is government contracts. That's how it has been interpreted.
Well, I mean, I didn't follow it closely, right?
Yeah.
In my years in the legislature, what I understood, and what you read to me, it's strange to me.
Correct.
But what I understood it to mean is that no individual employee
Correct.
within the entity can just go blurt out him out about
Anybody
confidential
else
matters.
would.
But that would not preclude the authority within the agency making, as a matter of fact, some of the legislation that I can recall actually required them to do it. Required them to make public.
Well, Mr. Golding, in the interest of time, I am reassuring both yourselves and the public that this is not JAMP's reading of the Act. This is what the Integrity Commission has advised JAMP when we inquired as to why it was no longer available, which we have shared with the Joint Select Committee with the hope that this will be changed forthwith.
So, Jeanette, if you could just share what kinds of, first of all, where did we used to be able to go to find out who was awarded contracts, of how much, when, by what procedures?
The OCG website. I used to do it.
Website. And interestingly enough, Carol and Mr. Golding and your listeners, even when the Integrity Commission began in 2018 and was operationalized, we were still for 2 years getting that information now on the Integrity Commission's website, and it is still there. So you can still go to the website. You can still click on the dated information of 179,000 contracts over the last 14 years. What you will not see is any since October 2020.
Well, I'm going to blame the two of you.
I'm interested in hearing why.
Yeah, but you're not kicking up no rumpus. It's the first time I'm hearing this.
There's more that can be said.
Well, you missed. What you need to say, Mr. Golding, is that you've missed the several public engagements that Jeanette has done,
social media,
the several press releases, the submissions to Parliament that has been looking at the Integrity Commission Act, etc.
You know, Carol, that is coming right back to that annual gathering that I suggested earlier.
Exactly, but it's also that people are the nation at large. These are not matters that I would say preoccupy us as a people on a day-to-day basis. Making the connection between why these things disappearing and our daily lives is, we need to do more work to help all of us to understand better why it matters to not have this information, how it can result in your child's school, right? Having a contract that went out for electrical works, and 2 months later, half of the school did burn down because the electrical works never do properly, right? Or something. Helping us to make the connection between how our lives and our children's lives, our communities are impacted by whether or not we are transparent about who gets contracts, when, where, and how, and for how much, and under what conditions.
Jeanette, what's the position with information regarding, for example, tax waivers? Because I know I had to deal with that as part of the fiscal responsibility framework back in 2010.
Well,
is that still available?
I'm glad you mentioned it, because I haven't really been following that, and I would say for the last 2 years. I really have to cry that is an oversight on our part. It used to be there in great detail, but I can't really say that this is something JAMP has focused on, and I'm making note of that.
Yeah.
What I want to share with you, though, about additional concerns for lack of information also speaks to the matter of the public campaign financing laws under ROPA. I mean, this is something I think Jamaica got kudos for being the first English-speaking, Commonwealth nation to write this into our laws. But what is disturbing for us that we've been following up is that there is no time frame within which the assessments done by the EOJ need to be provided to the public. So there were reports that needed to be done, anything over like 100 million to either the candidates or the parties. But there was nothing in the law that says, Mr. Golding, by when. It has been 2 years. Arguably, the citizens can say, even if the act never said by when, but goodness gracious me, 2 whole years. Now, that is another area.
Have you engaged the Electoral Commission on this?
I have engaged a particular public servant there, but not anybody on the commission directly. Because what is happening is, and this is what we want to do for the public, when JAMP came out with its trackers, which is, and a lot of folks might not know exactly what we do, we create digital tools, Mr. Golding, to make it easier to give simple information around accountability and give citizens access to the public servants who are responsible for fixing things. So we were said, I remember very clearly, a member said, boy, what we need to do, Jeanette, is track the money that the candidates get. So we said, great idea. We're responding to the public. We began to try to design a tracker to track that and fell into the roadblock. No information. Why? The law doesn't say when. The EOJ needs to give it to us.
And you could just use the opportunity, Jeanette, to plug the fact that you are developing some new trackers, one of which will be around the public expenditure tracking.
Absolutely. And I think the last time I was here, Mr. Golding, you were really taken aback when I shared with you about the tracker and advised you that having almost finished that tracker, the data analysis of 179,000 contracts says 78% of the contracts between 2006 and 2020, 78% was done without full public knowledge. That is why we need to have access to this information. And I remember your concern at the time.
And by without public knowledge, you mean we're not put to tender?
Well, let me be very fair. There are different types of methodologies. There's limited tender, where it only to 3 people. There's also sole sourcing, where it goes just to 1 person. So there's a variation. But what we call open tender and competitive tender, 78% of them didn't see that. So in other words, the public who might be interested would never know, because it's just between the government and a few contractors, or the government and 1 contractor, or government to government directly.
Then what is it that I'm seeing every now and then in the press? And sometimes I'm browsing and I just come across it, where some government agencies putting out invitation to bid for some contractor or the other. Isn't that a standard required procedure? If the contracts are over a certain value?
I would say to you, Mr. Golding, that this is one of the areas where I get flabbergasted, and when I'm a little strong, and I will say several times, we are having a quibble with corruption, but we're not having a fight. Because we have had a public procurement law since 2015. This is 2022. And pick up any Auditor General's report, and this is the difference between, say, crime and murder and corruption, though they're related. We have a public entity that tells us every single solitary year where the laws are being totally disregarded as it relates to public procurement. We have never seen anybody in this country held account for that, and we're talking about billions of dollars that the Auditor General will say, look here, nobody knew about this. Entity after entity, the report goes to the Parliament, and this is why I struggle a little bit, as Carl was saying earlier, with even the idea of a raise. The reports go to Parliament, and as Carol said earlier, the PAC sits, but those reports are not being tabled for a broad-based discussion to take place where the collective Parliament decides and then Cabinet moves on it and then the entity moves on it. It might shock you to know this, but this is again a transparency issue. Those PAC reports, if they are not tabled, Mr. Golding, the media cannot get the benefit of the recommendations that the PAC, this is a bipartisan committee, we can't get access to know what are they saying ought to be done so that we can cauterize the bleeding of the billions.
But has there been any instances in which the report is submitted but not tabled?
Since for the PAAC, it has been. For the PAC, since 2016, it has not been. Now, I'm very happy to say that through JAMP's advocacy and a good business leader in the House, Mr. Bartlett committed when we met with him that he would. And last week, we had the first meeting since 2016 to have the tabling of the PAC report. So civil society is making a difference, Mr. Golding. We have to do the research. We have to meet with our parliamentarians, and what we're seeing here is a response. But it is alarming since 2016 to know that we couldn't access this. And what is this? Recommendation from a PAC to tell us what needs to be.
But I'm not following you, no. I'm not following you.
Tell me again.
When the PAC meets,
right,
it meets to discuss the report that
the
Auditor General has submitted,
yes, sir,
which has been laid on the table of the House.
That's correct. But after 1 year of sittings, say approximately about 9 or 10 meetings for the year,
yes,
there's an annual report. They have sat for 12 months looking at ways.
Oh, you're talking about the report of the committee.
And that is the important report.
I see.
That is our MPs saying to the country, saying back to the Parliament, this is what we recommend needs to be done to cauterize and to plug the leakage. That's a crucial report.
And the importance of that step is that the Auditor General can only go find out and
no
report.
Further. Or civil
Can't
society.
take it any further. It's the parliamentarians
has to do their
and
job.
cabinet who have to then take things further along the road. So it you know, Mr. Golding, the role of civil society has to be seen as going beyond individual organizations like a JAMP, because unless a JAMP gets endless amounts of money to do what it has to do, it cannot by itself, it can move the needle as it has been doing because it is raising the matters in the quarters where they need to be raised. It is trying to meet with those who have the power and the authority to make the difference. So it meets with leader of government business to say, you know, here are some reports that are not getting discussed, etc., etc. But we really have to move ourselves to the day, and your program is helping, other programs are helping, we just have to keep at it. Move to the day where it's a wider swathe of the population.
Well, in that regard,
that takes an interest and asks the question.
Yeah, in that regard. But you know, I mean, my helper is part of the population, but my helper don't have much of a voice and she don't have much of an influence. There are other elements of the
She
public.
probably needs to join the Household Workers Association, and that would help.
And there's a
To what extent have you sought to sensitize critical stakeholders in the country, movers and shakers, private sector, church, and so on? To what extent have you sought to kind of build a broad coalition on this question of accountability, transparency, responsiveness?
The last time we did that, as I said, was 2010 to 2015. And in that coalition, we were able to move together and push together to get the Parliament to act on the Electoral Commission recommendations around registration of political parties, campaign finance reform, etc. Because if you remember, Mr. Golding, that report was languishing for a while there, right? And there was almost a break in the convention of just automatically accepting the recommendations of the Electoral Commission. When the coalition together pushed, private sector, all of us pushed, we wrote to cabinet, we wrote to parliament, we wrote to this, that, and another, there was movement. Together, we were able to push the single anti-corruption agency into being. Together, we were able to push and table positions on tax reform.
Well, it seems to me, Carol, it seems to me you don't need to reinvent the wheel. You only need to pump it up because it gets punctured.
Well, you know, things. No, but the point I'm making is, yes, there is a place for multi-sectoral, a structure for multi-sectoral collaboration. whether it needs to be another organization or just a forum that meets on a set regular schedule.
Because of course, there's all
an organization that has to go sign funding for this, that, and the other, and get set. You understand?
And of course, there's always the risk and the danger of conflicts of interest.
Right. But we worked out a way of working in that space that minimized conflicts, etc. And if we keep our collaboration on the broad issues, yes, sometimes private sector breaks ranks because private sector interests might not always coincide with other interests. But when you keep it at the broad level of are these things good governance practices, and can we agree together that this is good for the society? We have demonstrated that we've been able to work together, and I agree with you. There is definitely a necessity to keep a space open for that kind of cross-sectoral work.
I'm out of time and I got to run, but I want to thank both of you, Narcisse
thank you as
and
well.
Jeanette Calder. Thank you so much.
When I come back, I will talk to you about that Public Accountability Inspectorate that you set up. That I don't want to get that back. I hope you'll have me on soon again about that.
We need to we have to keep this conversation going. So
yes.
Don't be surprised if my producer called you again.
I look forward. Thank you, Mr. Golding.
Thank you very much.
Mr. Golding.
Today we're talking about the issue of governance, state of governance. We've had some very interesting exchanges since we began the discussion around noon. And I'm very pleased to be joined now by past president of the Private Sector Organization of Jamaica, Mr. Howard Mitchell. Howard, welcome to the program.
Hi, sir. How are you?
I'm
Thank
good.
you for having me. Mm-hmm.
I heard you on radio recently.
Mm-hmm.
I don't know you to be a man who surrenders to anguish and frustration, but I got a sense it's one of two things, Howard. Either something is seriously wrong with the country, or the people believe that there's something seriously wrong with the country, or both.
Or a third one, that there is an absence of belief in our country because our people have not been showed or gathered around any set of principles, policies, and strategies that give us a sense of being a country. And I am concerned. I do give in to despair from time to time because we do not understand as leaders that governance is not just about government, it's about how we conduct ourselves in our daily lives so as to achieve a collective objective that is good for the country. And I think we have lost sight of that.
Oh, let's bring in Dr. Nadeen Spence, a political commentator. Let's welcome her to the discussion. Nadeen, are you there?
I'm here,
Good.
and thanks for inviting me.
Yeah, man.
Hi, Nadeen.
Howard, try and explain that to me again, because I'm not sure that I fully understand it.
All right. What I'm saying about governance is that many of us, take governance to only be the way in which a government, a state, performs, how it carries out its daily function, and whether or not there is discipline and efficiency and integrity in that. But it's more than that. Governance has to do with how an individual conducts their business, how efficiently they do that. Governance has to do with how a society sets up its institutions and its structures and its social objectives. And I think we have lost sight of that.
Nadeen, your comment?
I agree. I think a lot of the times we hear people talk about how corrupt we are, but people are saying that without being fully aware of our governance framework. So somebody says, for example, there is corruption, and if you ask, give me a little bit more detail, they will say something like, those politicians are stealing our money. But if you say to people, do you know we have a really very comprehensive anti-corruption framework that is scaffolded by some institutions that, if we look at them individually, these institutions are very well respected and do a very good job of holding people to account. People don't know that, and people can't relate to that. So I talk to people all the while about, for example, boards being the first bastion in the fight against corruption. And that part of what we have to do is hold boards accountable. But we always miss that business of saying, let us pay close attention to who sits on a board and how boards are appointed. Let's ask for more information there. Nobody wants to pay attention to that. Or what happens in the parliament when public officers have to come and sit and answer questions. Or entities such as the Auditor General and the work of the Auditor General, and all of the other institutional framework that we've put in place. I think very few Jamaicans are aware of the depth of the anti-corruption framework, and I think people like to exist in this space, you see, where what we say is Jamaica is just corrupt, and I don't think that Jamaicans are paying enough attention.
What I thought Howard was suggesting, though, and I hope I'm not misinterpreting him. What I thought Howard was suggesting is that if the people themselves cannot reach some kind of understanding agreement as to what the politician's job description is, then how are you going to hold the politicians accountable?
That's a big part of it, Bruce, because I think somewhere along the line, we lost sight of the relationships between the political directorate and the society, and maybe the majority of us have this view that it's only transactional. And I think Nadeen is quite correct in that we have a structure in place for institutional governance, but because we don't have a belief and a set of principles and a set of commitments to the exercise of the functions within the political directorate and in the society, there's a disconnect, and all we can say is that the politician them two thieves. But we don't understand that unless we, the people, have a cognizance of how we want ourselves to be governed, it's not going to happen. And there's this huge anomie or disbelief. And as a result, people behave individually and in their own interest to the exclusion of everything else.
All right, let me try and put that point in a kind of context. Nadeen, I'd love to hear you on this. You know, a lot of us get up in the morning. We're not sure how we're going to get the children to school. We're not sure what we're going to put in the pot for them when they come home this evening. That's our daily challenge, no? And we have to jump out and we have to hope for the best and so on. Sometimes if you stand up down Halfway Tree Square at 7:30 in the morning and watch people going about their business, crossing the street, walking on the sidewalk, and you look at the expression on their face, some of them look like they're going to war. They're under pressure, no? Now, if that is the kind of struggle that individuals are going through, and in all of the pressure they are under, of course, them finding a whole heap of people to blame why them suffering, no? In that kind of situation, how do you meld their individual hopes and aspirations and wishes? How do you meld that into a kind of national framework, a kind of community interest, so that we could satisfy the concern that Howard is raising? That, you know, if all of us are pulling in different directions, the government is simply going to slip through all of those cracks and don't really pay us no mind.
I think the how of it is when those of us who have responsibility for kind of crafting a national sentiment, don't lose sight of the fact that there are some people who are, from day to day, trying to grapple with a reality that is not a figment of their imagination. Like it's a reality that they have to deal with every day. And so when we talk about what is Jamaica about and what is this Jamaica that we have, this Vision 2030, I think we have to know exactly what you just described, that there are some people who, for them, the idea of a place to live, work, and raise family is really just how do I ensure that in the next 6 months I am able to not starve, or I am able to earn enough money to buy food to put on the table, and that we never lose sight of that in our discussion about what Jamaica is and how Jamaica should be. I think too often, we kind of lose sight of the fact that the reason why some people, as you rightly say, are so angry is because they can't find a way out. And when people can't hear their reality reflected in the conversations we are having at certain levels, they tune out from us and they figure that they have to go it alone, and they start to figure it out for themselves. Well, and so I think we need enough. Yeah.
Howard,
Bruce, can I take
Howard, I think we're getting an echo, Howard, from your line.
Are you
are you on speakerphone?
Hello?
Yeah, I think that's a little better, yes.
All right, if I could take that a step further and postulate that if our commonly accepted belief is A, that all a politician is there for is to give me something, B, all big man and all political people thief, C, that the institutions of the state, the schools, the hospitals are not serving me properly, then my behavior is going to be conditioned by that. And I give you an example. I have a retired employee who got onto this program, one of Nigel's class, well-intentioned programs, where he could get $10,000 during COVID. He applied, he got the number, he got accepted, got the number, and this a year has passed, and he never got the money. So he calls in, and he's not, all he's getting is turned off. So his thing is that some politician thief him money, and no matter what I can do, and by politician, by the way, he doesn't necessarily only mean the political electorate, the elected politicians. It means somebody in a government thieving money. And all I can do, I am going to have to now take him down to the Ministry of Finance, walk him through the process, and find out what happens. Our people have been left alone, and they are in a state of distrust and disbelief. That's what I'm saying. And we need to find a way to fix that.
Well, how do we fix that?
I agree with that. I think one thing is to put the civics back in school, but I also think that the people who offer themselves a service, whether as MPs or as councillors, have to have the kind of understanding of their responsibilities so that they know that part of what they do is that they help to organize people for action. Is that we have to have community organizing such that people start to put all of this together. People have to start putting it together and recognize that it's not something that I alone am facing. That perhaps it's because the people who speak like us, look like us, live where we live, have gone to the schools that we have, that we are experiencing this particular reality so that they can see it as systemic prejudice, which we have not yet addressed substantially enough, so that when a Jamaican who comes from that same space goes to work in a ministry or in a hospital, they learn to treat their own people with the same level of disdain. They themselves become a part of that system.
I agree with that. I agree with that.
The level of dignity that they deserve to be treated with.
Yes, Howard.
Bruce, there is a tension between the community and the political system that is inimical to progress. over and over, community organizations they seem to have to be politicized in order for them to work. And I just wonder if that is part of what causes this hostility towards the established order, right? I just wonder if what we did was build the community around the idea of a common objective shared by the political directorate with the community. It couldn't work any better.
But do we have communities there, or is it just people who live in proximate to each other?
Well, we haven't. I think that since probably since Norman Manley and what was that, the cooperative society thing, we have made
social welfare.
Attempts.
Yeah.
Sorry?
The social welfare program.
Right,
yeah.
social welfare. We have made sporadic attempts to build community organizations, but we have never put it in the center of our activities. And all social life springs from the family, the community, the village, and goes up. That's where it goes. That's the fountainhead of social order and behavior. And we're trying to push it down, and it's not going to go down.
But what's the infrastructure in the communities like, though, Howard? I mean, when I was growing up within a community, there were leaders who that didn't need to wear no button. There was the teacher, there was the policeman, there was the nurse, there was the parson. The community had its own leadership, and it knew who to look up to. It knew who to take guidance from. What do we have today?
Well, I understand that whole structure has passed away. But if you look at, for instance, what Professor Gladstone Hutchinson has done in Latin America, what he's doing in Baltimore now, in building communal systems into the inner city, you have a template of what it is that we have to do in the 21st century to replicate the kind of respect that is needed for us to operate as a cohesive society with common goals and to get back to a Vision 2030 kind of thing. Because all that we have done is destroyed what was there, or allowed what was there to go away, and have not replaced it with any structure that can fit our modern requirements. That's what we need to spend time to do.
Nadeen?
And we see that in terms of if we were to say to ourselves, how is this society called Jamaica structured? What is at the core of it? We can't say that right now. What is at the core of who we are? We can't, because we don't have any philosophy of being. When I was an undergraduate student, Louis Lindsay taught me the word autochthonous, that which springs from the people. There is nothing now that springs from us that informs how we do our big things, our politics, our institutional building. There's a disconnect between how we are at the core of the society and how we organize institutions, how we organize ourselves. There is no connecting principle. What is the organizing principle of Jamaica? What is it that we gravitate around? What is it that pulls us together as a people?
Is this peculiar to Jamaica, or this is something that is just a consequence of how the world has evolved in the last half a century?
I think it's a function of the technological revolution, the fourth industrial revolution, and all the things that have happened to us in modern times. But that does not say that, as a matter of fact, we know what causes the destruction, but we haven't paid any attention to replacement and refurbishment and maintenance of it. So that is why you have people even now gathered around the TV watching the funeral service for Mrs. Queen, because they need something. They need something to believe in, and they need something to attach themselves to, and we have not put that into the mix. That's what I agree with Nadeen. We have not looked at our culture, looked at the things that make us who we are, the good things, and built them into our socialization. It just happened. There's no structure
and we also haven't developed a process for citizenship. Becoming a citizen is a very peculiar thing, and it involves a philosophy of identity of the people who live in a particular space. The original idea of the state was not just that people live together in a space, and by virtue of the fact that you, as you said earlier, Mr. Goulding, because we're neighbors and we rub shoulders, we're automatically a community. A community is forged out of some other things. Shared beliefs, yes, and those things have to be taught. They have to come from a place.
Is America having that problem? Is England having that problem?
Of course it is. Worse than us. Than us.
Yeah. I think we are underestimating the value of people gathering in a community center and talking about their common reality. I think we are thinking that emails and social media has replaced that Zoom has replaced that. But before any of that happens, there first has to be that kind of coming together of people, eye to eye, shoulder to shoulder, the sharing of faith, so that the other things that come can work.
Sorry, Nadeen, we have spent too much time dividing ourselves and not encouraging the things that bring us together.
Yeah. There's a lot of work that we have to do. If we believe that the nucleus of society is the family, and if we feel that the family needs to be nurtured through some core principles that are taught in the church, in the school, at our community sphere, at the functions that we usually come together around, that the people who usually hold are the guardians of the community, whether it's the district constable, the teacher. If we believe that these are the people who are the carriers of the principles of our culture, the people who tell stories about our past, and believe that this is what it is about, we haven't done enough work. We have the institutions to do it, but I don't think we have gone into culture as more performative than culture as necessary for socializing.
The focus of the discussion today is governance. But what both of you seem to be suggesting is that we also need to focus on our governability.
Bruce.
Yes.
What do you think has caused the rise of the gang? I put it to you. I submit that what has caused the rise of the gang is that the scamming activity, the extortion, provides individuals with and the behavior of the gang, or the gang culture, and gangs are communities, by the way, it gives people something to coalesce around. And we have left that space. So the gangs move into it. And that is a direct function of the collapse of institutional social leadership across the board, not just the political directorate. That if you leave that space there, energies, the human energies that we have, will create a destructive community called a gang, which will occupy the space. And that's the problem we have to address.
But I don't want to appear to be shifting blame around and spreading the blame so thin that you never know exactly where to fix the problem. But I worry sometimes. I mean, having been in politics and you represent communities, and you kind of sometimes you sit down there in a corner with a red stripe in your hand and you're observing and you're taking careful mental note of some things. When you look at what kind of community, I'm asking this to both of you, what kind of community can you build if the elements that you're going to use to build that community are some children that were born to children? Because my mother was 14 years old when she had me. I am raised primarily by a 14-year-old mother and with some help from a grandmother. I grew up with all kind of weird ideas in my mind about what is right and what is wrong. By the time I get to school, the teacher could have tried to let them drop down. Them can't correct that. I spoiled from morning. We have a crisis.
Nadeen,
I mean, I grew up in a little country district called St. Faith's. And the people, I mean, my parents were teachers, but the people who lived next door us. Father was a cultivator, and the mother stay at home and look after the house and the children. Them poor. But these were my friends. I mean, we used to play under the cellar. But despite their own poverty and the economic challenges that they had, their kids were taught by Master Alty and Miss Louise. They were taught what was right and what was wrong. They understood. Now, when you have a kid now and him hear about lot of scamming, as far as I'm concerned, that is a good vocation.
Mm-hmm.
There's nothing wrong with that, so long as you don't get caught.
Nadeen, you have to answer that,
Mr. Howard Brucey, my sister is a teacher in a school in Mobile, and she came to me there that we were talking the other day, and she said she was interviewing her 7th grade students, just talking to them about who they are. She's a teacher of reading. And she asked her, so what do your parents want? One of them said, "He's a scammer." Yeah, and so you're right. There are some people who we have reached a point where some people think that this is legitimate work. And the children will say, "That's what my father does," And my sister said, when she said to him, "You can't say that him look on our perfect." "What do you mean we can't say that him do?" So yes, you're right. I think we have lost it. And I think part of it is because we spent so long denying that coming out of slavery and colonialism, we never had the basics in the first place. For most of us, we never had it. From what I read of our history, there were lots of people who were running away from rural poverty and moving into enclaves in Kingston where you could not build community, you could not build family. And I don't think we have thought through what that would have done to us. I honestly believe that we have to come to some sort of reckoning with the idea that some of us who stayed behind in rural Jamaica, some of us as our forebears who stayed behind in rural Jamaica were able to continue on with a certain kind of principled living that poverty, that urban poverty never allowed some people to engage in.
Last word for you, Howard. We have 45 seconds.
I agree that it is late. The time is very late. And at Bruce, I agree that there are some of our fellow citizens that are in way apart from us. But if we don't start with something now, it's not going to get better. So I suggest that this is why we should concentrate on the inner city and try and rehabilitate the institutional structures in there. That's where we must start. Because if we don't start, we will never finish.
Do we start with the whole community or we start with the youngsters?
We start with
those under 15.
We start with the youngsters. And clearly this is going to take a lot of study. But the fact is that if we do not address that vacuum, it will continue to be filled by the scammers and the gangs and the extortionists.
Gotta go. I want to thank both of you, Mr. Howard Mitchell, former president of the PSOJ, and Dr. Nadeen Spence, political commentator, social commentator. Thank you both. Rounding out the discussion on governance. That's it for today. We'll be back here next week. Next week, Monday, God willing, to do it all over again. Thanks to my producer, technical team, engineers, everybody. Hail up everybody, and thank you so much.